Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting. Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Broughton. Today, we are looking at a topic that has kind of come to the forefront, in my mind at least, and some others that I've spoken to. Rusty Reno and Carl Truman, they have all talked or written about Christian engagement in cultural and intellectual spheres, particularly higher education within the humanities. And they emphasize that there has been a failure of creedal Christians really to enter into these fields and to engage robustly in a way that kind of checks the spread of kind of modern ideologies. Maybe you would call it liberalizing tendencies, or the watchword today is wokeness, whatever you want to call it. That there has been a lack of this engagement and that people aren't entering into these fields. And they warn us, essentially, that a vacuum will necessarily be filled. And what we really need, they're saying, is people who are creedal Christian, who have the conscience to endure engaging in those discussions, to enter into the fray so that the countervailing winds have some check and balance, so that these departments or these institutions of higher education aren't completely taken over with a different kind of, or one particular kind of mindset. So in order to talk about that today, we have with us President Russell Dawn. He's the president of Concordia University, Chicago, and also Adam Francisco. He is the director of academics at 1517. Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, it's good to have you. So help me understand the picture in kind of the humanities in general, and how important it is to have differing points of view so that kind of iron sharpens iron, so that your study and the rigor of that study isn't just taken over by one kind of mindset or ideology or another. How important is it for the passing on of information and the ability to study? How important is it to have those differing points of view? Adam, why don't you begin?
Yeah, I'll take the first stab at it. It's vital. I would say probably more important to it, though, is having for lack of a better way of putting it, an open environment where a viewpoint or a consensus, though we're not on video, I'm using air quotes there, a consensus can be challenged, and I hate using this word in this context, but can be challenged safely.
Okay.
Meaning that more important is that you're in an environment that is all, an academic environment that is trained, in terms of its sites being trained on discovering, affirming, pursuing what is true, or what is good, true, and beautiful, if we want to put it that way. Mm-hmm. That's more important than a diverse environment, and certainly much more important than an artificially engineered diverse environment. But in an environment where the telos, the aim or the target is towards discovering and affirming and passing on what is good, true, and beautiful, if it's an environment that's that is the final goal, and there's a buy-in. I think that diverse viewpoints, interpretations of a text, or perspectives on a historical episode, or what have you, is extremely healthy. I think you put it earlier, because it does help sharpen our understanding of things. But diversity just for the sake of diversity, with no sort of telos, is no or no antidote to the present chaos. It might help challenge or stall the progressivist speed train that we seem to be on, but in the end, it's not. If truth isn't the goal, you're just everybody's just opining, gassing off, to use the more technical language, I guess.
Right. And I'd add to that this, what you're really talking about is the adversarial system. And just like in law, we've settled on the adversarial system as the best way of getting at truth, because unless we're challenged, unless a viewpoint gets challenged, we won't know for certain how sound that viewpoint is. We have to be pushed to the limits of that, and either our viewpoint breaks. Maybe it's our interpretation of an author in a lit class, or maybe it's an understanding of why people interact in certain ways in a sociology class. Whatever it is, either the viewpoint breaks because it doesn't ultimately hold up, or it's sharpened and hardened like steel. And so very important that we get there, that we get to that sharpest, firmest, clearest understanding, whether it's an understanding of something ordinary and earthly, like a text, like a novel, or something as critical and eternal as the Word of God. Historically, we didn't come to as full of an understanding of, say, the Trinity until a lot of how the church articulated the Trinity got challenged, and we as a church really had to firm up and clarify our understanding of God's revealed Word.
Yeah, I might add, if I can, Jason, here in many ways, interestingly, the medieval schoolmen in this classics, have are a good example of what can be accomplished, though despite their theological shortcomings and so on, they do give a good example of what could be accomplished if scrutiny and back and forth is not just allowed, but becomes sort of the standard in their what's commonly called their dialectical method. If you read somebody like Thomas Aquinas, or there's a whole bunch of others, when they assert a point, make a proposition about what is true, in their tomes, these massive volumes on theology and every other topic that's related to theology, and for them everything is related to theology, they're always trying to figure out what the rationale is behind that proposition, or how they came to arrive at that assertion. They're always challenging it in their own mind, by coming up with counter arguments. They might make the assertion, it is true that God exists. And then they will, in their writing, they'll say, well, I'm kind of making this up, right? But, well, we could say that perhaps he doesn't exist. Well, then the next statement is, well, how do we know that he does exist? And here's some reasons. But then, as like say in Thomas's Loci, he gives 5 reasons for believing God exists, but he's always challenging whether those 5 reasons are actually make it through critical scrutiny. Yeah. So in a way, what was accomplished by the medieval schoolmen is kind of what, in a different way, to be sure, kind of what's very critical for higher education today. That, again, I don't want to repeat myself, but that truth is the goal, and there's an environment where that assertions about what is good, true, and beautiful can be challenged in an environment that again, I hate using this word, safe, where you're not worried about being doxxed or fired or, those sorts of things.
Yeah. So it sounds like what we're wrestling with now, I mean, since kind of the rise of liberalism within the West, not classical, but the more liberal understanding that we have today, counter or opposite of conservative, either values or even ends and goals. It sounds like we're wrestling with, what's a university for? What's the point of college education? And is it just an extension of, reading, writing, and arithmetic, something that you do in grammar school, or is there a higher purpose to higher education?
Sure. Well, I would argue that the reading, writing, and arithmetic is not as basic and mundane as some might think. I actually think higher education is, in a way, an extension of that, because being able to read and to write, to articulate arguments that are both sound and winsome, and to understand the patterns in mathematics that reflect the mind of God. These are very high things into which we educate young people, and just continue that education and expand on that education in higher ed. So I would say, in a lot of ways, we are continuing that which was begun in the home and nowadays in the school, and the purpose is indeed extremely high. It is, it's under heaven. It is the highest of purposes, and that's the formation of people for their vocations, formation of husbands and fathers, of men to be husbands and fathers, and women to be wives and mothers, and for people to be good members of their Christian community, of their churches, and to be civic minded members of the wider community. So these are the goals of higher ed. I mean, Adam was correct. It's the pursuit of truth. It is also the formation of people through that pursuit of truth.
Yeah. If I can jump in to your question about what was it? Something to the utility. Many people are wondering about the utility of higher education, I think, is kind of what you.
I mean, in essence, it sounds like kind of what we're wrestling with now is not just its utility, but what is the goal and the aim of higher education? Is it to build upon what has been done, or is it just simply kind of job training? And it sounds like what you guys are describing is it's something bigger and higher than just getting a skill for a job, but rather, I mean, a training toward being able to search out and wrap one's mind around what is objective in this world, whether that's truth, goodness, beauty, and the like.
Yeah. It's. It's interesting. I still spend quite a bit of time on college campuses. Last week, I think it was, I was at Hillsdale, and shortly before that, I had watched the movie Surprised by Oxford. So in my head, I'm thinking, well, these places have kind of captured or retain what university education has been and still ought to be about and is about. You can go to Concordia, Chicago, and spend time, especially with like the church work students. But even outside of that, Russ has done all this work I don't know that it's backbreaking because it's maybe not physical, but I imagine it's not a little stressful maybe, but in turning the ship a bit so that truth is back on the radar, but interestingly, pop around colleges and universities, that's by and large been left behind. And so thank goodness that there are some institutions that still do that. But I think a lot of people's dismay, and I share it, being the father of two kids now that one is just on the cusp of college age, one is college age, but has decided not to go to college, at least presently. And who knows? He was a college or a high school wrestler, so I don't know that he has the mind for college anymore, but that's just a joke. Sorry. Shouldn't have said that. A lot of people, I mean, this is national polls bear this out time and again, that a lot of your sort of traditional, if you will, Americans are very suspicious of higher education, but not of the vision that Russ articulated, or that a place like Hillsdale or Concordia or a handful of others are preserving, but they see what most places are doing with all the you called it kind of the liberalization of higher education, or the progressivist ideological agenda that seems to be almost ubiquitous. Especially in the humanities and the social sciences. So you got that, but then you also get the at least the advertising, mostly because these sorts of programs bring in a lot of students, and it makes sense. You need students for an institution to survive. But the professionalization of the majors, such that many majors are. The reason that they're offered is because they will lead to a particular profession, some of which might, a degree might not be required for that particular profession in terms of at least the intellectual side of things. So, but I don't know, Russ can correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's still the case, though, that our nation is currently passing through a remarkable demographic change, in that there are fewer college age students than there were in the pool than there were just 10 years ago. So now you've got colleges and universities that have to compete with each other for students in a way that they haven't really in the past. And one of the ways to attract students is to offer a major or a program that's where a job is virtually guaranteed at the end of your 4 years. And that's I don't mean to write that off. A job or a vocation at the end of 4 years is an important thing, especially if you're having to pay off student loans. So it's not a bad thing to have, by any stretch of the imagination, to have a program that leads to some sort of job. But if a worldview shaping education, an education that inspires virtue, that forms character, is not also part of the package, then all it is something you can do at like Vatterott or one of these, like a professional type of a vocational school. And why wouldn't somebody choose a vocational school over a much more expensive university or college if that's all that that's all that higher education has been reduced to?
Sure. Yeah, you're exactly right. The demographic cliff is real, and it's a combination of fewer college-age students and also a lower percentage of those students choosing to go to college for the reasons you've described. In a way, it depends on the profession, but in many of the professions, the easiest part of a college education is providing an education that will help someone get a job. Forming someone in their character to be a good member of the family, the church, and the community. That is, in many ways, a more difficult lift educationally, and maybe a far more difficult lift now than it used to be, because so many students come in anemic in that learning. Because it used to be that you could expect students to come in with more of that formation than we're finding today, and it's just the virtues. I mean, how many people can even cite what the virtues are? If you're thinking of the seven cardinal virtues, it's a lost thought in Western society, and viewed often with scorn, if you talk about it that way. But ultimately, people will continue to run away from university education the more that education is focused purely on job preparation, because, like I said, that's the easiest thing that a college does. So we need we as universities have to stay the course in the formation aspect. We, yes, prepare for jobs, of course, but we need to be formative, and we need there to be somewhat of a cultural shift, and it's possible that we're seeing that. I'm almost never optimistic about the culture, so I'm not optimistic at this time. But maybe, just maybe, we are seeing a moment of shift in that toward the idea that, well, yeah, we actually do need this sort of formation, and hopefully that will begin to bear some fruit, so that more people see the value in a college education. I'm not at all surprised. I don't think anybody should be surprised that people started abandoning college educations once it became clear that colleges abandoned the pursuit of truth. I mean, really, what's the point? If there's no truth, why am I sitting here trying to figure out different ways to turn myself into a mental pretzel, arguing against the existence of truth? It borders on the absurd.
Yeah, from what you describe, I mean, particularly with regard to like mathematics and then writing and being able to make an argument, being formed by truth and thus having virtue, it sounds like the kind of instructor then is really important, so that you're not just handing over a body of knowledge, but also pointing beyond that knowledge to something greater than it. So
Yes.
how important is that instructor, and what do they need to be informed on? And do you have a pool of those for math, for the various fields within science? Assuming you do for theology, but then even learning certain languages or looking at history and literature of all the way from ancient to modern. Do we have the kind of people needed to instruct and lead these people, the students, out of kind of ignorance into an unveiling of the truth that is found even in ancient pagan literature, but also, throughout Shakespeare and forward, or even just in like psychology or social sciences? Do we have the kind of people that are needed to do this teaching?
Great question. And the answer is we do, but the pool is too shallow at this time.
Okay.
It is very difficult to find people who are well formed by truth themselves, who then want to be in a university and sort of helping to form others in that truth, and particularly where particularly at a university or a college that is of the church. And the reason for that is we church-based institutions tend not to pay as well as those that are supported directly and fully by the state and by other, secular granting organizations and that sort of thing. And so the competition for faculty members is very stiff. They're difficult to find. It doesn't mean we can't find them, and it doesn't mean we don't find them. We've actually found great success, especially recently, in bringing in people who want to be part of what we're doing, because what we're doing is special and partakes of this ancient pursuit of truth, the great conversation. So we do find them. In fact, found a new psychology professor just this last year who's great. Social sciences is maybe the most challenging in terms of finding people of faith, creedal faith, who want to be part of this, and again in a place that just can't pay as well as the state school, around the corner. As I say, new political science, so psychology, political science, English literature, theater, which is another really challenging area. We've made all these hires just in the last several months, and it's so exciting. It is so great to be in a community of people who are all about these things that the three of us have been talking about for the last half hour or so.
So what would be the encouragement for, say, high schoolers to begin thinking about going into these fields, and what do they need to be aware about? I mean, I'm thinking of Martin Luther's discussion with regard to whether a soldier, whether a man should enter into the military service, and talks a lot about his conscience and being able to bear with what he's going to be asked to do within that field of service. How should parents and pastors be looking at not just raising up future pastors and servants of the church as church workers, so to speak, but looking at raising up future professors who can go into these fields and endure whatever they might have to endure in the current climate of things? What should we be kind of looking for in terms of their mental acumen, or even their ability to withstand pressure and pain, all of those sorts of things, so that maybe we can alleviate some of the demand by supply side economics.
Well, I'll jump in first here. I think two things are vital. One, and these are probably self-evidently true, but going into any field, for a Christian, you gotta, if you're a parent or a pastor and you're encouraging somebody to go into some sort of academic discipline, not just probably, certainly wise to knowing that young Christian believes that the gospel is true in a sort of way that it's factually true, I guess, is one way of putting it. Not that they don't just sort of like, assume it's true because Grandma Schmidt told me it's true, or my Pastor Schmidt told me it's true, but they actually they believe it's true in in a factual way, to repeat myself again. But in addition to that, I think it's vital for young people and for people recommending to young people that there's some sort of that they've had some training, or it's evident that person has a well-formed Christian worldview. Not that they're just able to I don't mean to sound irreverent here, but they're not just able to spout some theological cliches, but they really believe the things they say, and they see Christian doctrines as connected things, not just things they've memorized from a book, but it's like a vision or a lens through which they view everything.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is vital. I think additionally, and this would be hard to measure, but you got to have somebody who, because they will probably wash out in today's pretty kind of hostile environment, they've got to be a genuinely curious person, in that they want to know about these fields, and that, in the sense that they're motivated to do it, but they want to know, and they want to know, even if they're studying something that might have content that's hostile to Christianity, they want to know what makes that position or that person tick.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard for me sometimes to think about why this is so hard. I spent 3 years, I guess, at the Center for Islamic Studies, not full time. They're in Oxford, and I never once felt my faith being challenged, though most of the stuff I was learning was pretty hostile to Christianity. Mostly because I just simply wanted to know the Islamic arguments or the Islamic viewpoint the way that Muslims might articulate them. I had an ulterior motive, for apologetic purposes, but it's got to be somebody who's committed, not just rooted catechetically. That's vital, but rooted in terms of their overall worldview, and they have kind of an adventurous spirit, in that they're willing to get dirty, metaphorically speaking, in looking at exploring stuff that maybe the material, the text or whatever, isn't explicitly anti-Christian, but more often than not, the person teaching the text is probably going to have an anti-Christian, perhaps even an anti-Western bias that is not covert, but rather overt and quite polemical. So people who like that kind of stuff maybe are the people you might want. People who are not polemical by nature, but are curious about truth and want to defend the truthfulness or explain the truthfulness of Christianity in whatever environment they might find themselves in.
Yeah. So it seems like you're describing kind of what Chris Voss does in his book, Never Split the Difference. Something he calls tactical empathy, that just seeking to understand where someone else is coming from and their point of view, without having or feeling the push or the pull to agree with it, but just I'm understanding where you're coming from.
Yeah, I mean that's just sort of for me. I suspect for Russ, that's just sort of the disposition you ought to have as an academic.
Mm-hmm.
I call me crazy.
No, I don't think that's crazy. I think, but we live in a very kind of polarized, dogmatic world, and there's almost, it seems, less and less curiosity about somebody else's point of view than there ever has been, and it's hardening. It seems to me that I'm not saying that we shouldn't be dogmatic. What I'm saying is that it's hardening in such a way that we may win a battle or an argument, but we don't actually win anyone over because we've not actually answered any questions that they've had. And so I'm just kind of trying to grapple with, what that kind of person is, and what role do parents as well as pastors in particular, do they have in not only kind of passing on the dogmatic information, but also making them curious enough in other human beings and what they think, that they would take the time to look at them as an actual human being who is either created by God and also redeemed by the blood of Jesus, to see where they're coming from, and cultivating that. right? I mean, it seems like that's kind of, we're in this hardening age. It feels like that. And there's a time and a place for assertions. I know Luther delights in them, and that Christians should, but we also have this other side that sometimes I feel like, and I'm trying to teach people how to be humans again.
Yeah. So I'd like to interject on this as well. I would, if a parent or grandparent is listening to your podcast, and if you have a son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter that you believe has the intellect to become a professor, to join academia, then that's really the first question: is the intellect there? Then there's a lot of what Adam was talking about in terms of having the character of, he didn't say happy warrior, but he and I talk about that now and then, that we're in this in joy. The pursuit of truth, the pursuit of the life of the mind is a joyful pursuit. It's wonderful. I mean, thinking of kind of the apologist in chief, C.S. Lewis. He wasn't even a theologian, not a trained theologian. He was a literary scholar, and found great joy in the pursuit of truth and understanding in literature. And so the life of the mind is a wonderful life. We do need to be very carefully equipped, not only when we start it, but as we go along, in order to not be wooed, if you will, to the dark side, because it really is, there will be pressure, there will be angry pressure to move to progressivist, or you could just say secularist, anti-Christian, any number of terms. There will be angry pressure, but then there will also be sort of the lure that our sinful flesh feels and experiences toward untruth. It's just in our nature to be lured by untruth. So we have to enter it prepared, and then we have to remain prepared. There was one point in my studies, and actually relatively early, it was probably second year in advanced studies, that I was struggling with some aspects of biblical studies and some of the critical theory as applied to Scripture. And I turned to a friend of mine. This is a mutual friend. Adam knows him as well. And just asked, because I knew he was an Orthodox guy. I just said, well, how do you handle it? And he said, oh, it's easy. Just look for their presuppositions. And you can always undermine what they're saying based on their presuppositions. And it turned out to be true. It was the simplest and loveliest of approaches, and it has never failed. What's going on in their presuppositions often determines their critical anti-Christian outcomes. So they sort of presuppose that Christianity is false, and then come up with all these arguments that Christianity is false, and it becomes very easy. But if I didn't have someone there with me, helping me along that way, it would have been a much more difficult path. So, so we need to continue to equip ourselves and to ally ourselves with people who can help equip us, whether those be faculty members or fellow students. And it's rewarding, and it's not. And we don't go into ministry for the sake of the rewards, but the rewards are helpful in terms of longevity. If the life of the mind is only tedious, then joining that life is it's just not going to last that long. So I would encourage. I never thought I'd become a prof until really I was in my 30s when I started thinking about doing it, and it's been some of the most fun work that I've done in my whole life.
Jason, can I add one more thing? As we've been talking, this sort of came to my head. You mentioned a while back about the how do you discern whether somebody has the conscience or the disposition? to pursue, higher education in a way that they're going to come out on the other end, or fine in terms of their own faith and also their ability to navigate their profession in a way that's Christian, but also reputable or legitimate with respect to whatever their discipline might be.
Yeah.
I think another ingredient, and this is more, I don't know that this would fall in sort of the realm of catechetical formation, but I think it's vital. You mentioned how things seem to be ideological, and it's like dogma against dogma, in higher ed and in our world generally. And I think that is true. I think, and I'm probably going to take a little heat for this from a guy who made fun of me on your show in jest. We're friends, but I won't mention his full name, but David there. And so he'll probably pick up on this, but that critique cuts both ways, in that I think Christians, especially those who would come from our corner of the Christian world and related or adjacent type of confessions or denominations, we got to be careful with our, I guess we might say our epistemology, in that the way I see it, and maybe I'm wrong, and please feel free to push back, or I'm sure David he'll give me a call on the phone. That rather confessing Christians can approach sometimes fields of study that really that maybe they're new to, or they've only just started investigating, as what we might call naive realists, thinking that they have all the answers, because they memorize whatever they did in their homeschooling or their Christian school or whatever.
Sure.
And this isn't something or pastors do in catechesis, but I think it's vital in terms of youth group or, Bible study or whatever, to touch on the topic of epistemology, and for Christians to be comfortable in holding positions or exploring topics that aren't expressly biblical topics with a bit of humility, I'll say. Approach disciplines that aren't, everything is in some way can be made to connect to theology, but the further you get away from core Christian doctrines or core biblical doctrines, you get into gray areas. And when academic disciplines are overlapping in that gray area, it's important for Christians to be able to navigate that space in a way that they don't just simply impose some sort of dogma from that's only been around, perhaps an opinion or a tradition in their Christian community, let's say, for maybe 100 years, but rather Christians ought to be going into higher ed, ought to be uncomfortable in that gray area, and knowing full well that they might be able to find, or they might know some aspects of the truth in that arena, but they got to be open to learning more, and they can learn more from even unbelieving people. It might be learning more false information, but and bad arguments, but they've just got to, there's got to be a comfortability that comes from a more of a critical realist type of worldview in navigating those fields. I don't know if I'm making sense there, but I tend to I've seen it time and again, of Christians coming into academic study thinking they know everything already, even before they've begun their study, because they have this rock solid and good on them, worldview that is laudable, but then they will apply it sort of in ways that are sort of strange. It kind of mirrors like a fundamentalist type of disposition that just isn't apropos to that particular arena.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I wouldn't want to poo-poo fundamentalism altogether.
No, heavens, I'd prefer that over the rainbow flags at the Lutheran church down the road from me.
Right. But I guess But I think you have a point just in terms of, I mean, the Dunning-Kruger syndrome runs deep within all of us. And so we get into fields where we know a little and we think we know more than we actually do. And just having a little bit of humility to say, maybe there is something that I can learn, or at least let's wait at least to hear what this person says they think or believe before we label it and move on.
Yeah.
Those
are my thoughts exactly. I wish I would have said it that way.
Yeah. There is, in my experience, nothing like PhD level work to create intellectual humility. Now, it can, and probably does in some people, create a great deal of intellectual pride because they become experts, in their own very narrow field, and they give a conference paper and people applaud and blah blah blah. It's all, just typical pride stuff, human pride. But at the same time, in my experience, that delving down so deeply and becoming an expert in a very, very narrow field, and in my case, a very narrow and obscure field, is really helped to teach me how little I know about every other field on the face of the earth. And so, it's very humbling.
Yeah. I mean, it seems like this is where we find ourselves. Either, most pastors are called to be generalists, right? That we have to know a little about a lot. And that can inflate our understanding of things in general. And because people, at least the people who show up on Sundays, are quiet for most of the time that we're talking, can make us feel like we know more than we actually do. And then likewise, as you described it, those who have PhDs know a lot about, a narrow field. And if we just took a little time to recognize that there's always a lot for us to learn and engage in, and to maintain that curiosity level, maybe we could actually pass that on to future generations, and we might not find ourselves in kind of hard-lined messes.
Yeah.
Right. Good way of putting it.
I remember, I think Russ had a similar experience, but, working on PhD work as a guy who, I mean, the nickname I was given at Oxford was the Mad Lutheran. Not that I was crazy, but just like, uber orthodox or confessional. And then I started approaching history that way as I took this historiography class and history of Christian doctrine and so on. It wasn't my papers or research that really expressed this, but I did have this attitude that nothing really mattered but for what happened from 1517 onwards in northern Germany, in terms of the realm, in the history of Christianity and so on. And that was cleaned up pretty quickly when all of a sudden I'm just introduced to the whole swath of Christian history by experts in the field, and learned that there's just fascinating things going on in every tradition, that some connect, others don't, but have some bearing on the history of, and I don't want to use the word development, but for lack of a better term, the new or the developing articulations of Christian doctrine and Christian apologetics and things like that. So it's good to be a confessing or confessional Christian, but that's a public confession of what we believe to be true. It's not and it ought not be practiced as an ideology over which to impose, or that we impose upon subjects or academic subjects or anything else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that raises a question for me, and it's we're entering into a new year of making America great again, right? And And hopefully that happens, right? Hopefully we make America great again. And we're also, within the Missouri Synod, reclaiming some of the historical teachings, as well as its liturgy and its foundational articulation of the faith. And its universities are returning to its roots, not losing its past, but also trying to look towards the future and pivot in ways that they need to. But the question is, how do we work with, and do we at all, how do we work with other Christian traditions than in this making our universities more sound and being able to bring in people who have been formed by their doctrine, as well as an understanding of the virtues and a Christian worldview, to be able to be professors in these various fields that can sometimes be captured by more progressive ideologies. What role is there for us to working with other denominations, other Christian traditions, and how do you see that working together taking place?
That's a great question, and it's quite a varied answer, because different tradition, and I'll just use that term tradition to cover denominational as well as kind of belief tradition. The different traditions have different levels of fit, if you will, with our Lutheran tradition and our confessional faith. So some people come in quite amenable. Maybe they are not well catechized in their field. I mean, one thing that sometimes Lutherans, and especially theologically schooled Lutherans, forget is that so many people who have PhDs are not theologically sophisticated. They have PhDs in other fields, and they're very sophisticated in their fields, but they don't really know theology. And so there's a great opportunity if they come in sound theologically, in sort of you can think of that in a general creedal sense. They're sound theologically. Well, then there's great opportunity for them to learn about how the faith and their discipline intersect with each other, and to learn that from a Lutheran perspective. It actually helps form them further theologically. So they come in somewhat naive and generally creedal, and over time they become more and more Lutheran. Even if they never actually become Lutheran, they've onboarded certain Lutheran ideas, like simul justus et peccator is one that can actually be useful in understanding humanity, and therefore understanding certain humane disciplines. Or the two kingdoms is a great one. Long gospel. These are all different aspects of some of the same stuff, but that stuff comes into how we train our professors in terms of the intersection of faith and their discipline. And so it's relatively straightforward. Now there are others where it's much more difficult, and we're more reticent as we approach hiring individuals where where it's more of an uphill struggle to bring them into the faith. But some of them were already here, and they're Christian, but maybe their Christian faith is fairly well infused with the social gospel, or fairly well infused even with progressivism. Because they don't realize how their philosophical progressivism conflicts with their Christian faith. In those cases, it's a little more difficult. There's more work to be done, a little more of a backfill going on. maybe you could say a little more unlearning before the learning can take place. And so that just takes it just takes more work and patience on the part of our chief mission officer, who's charged with bringing about that learning. But it's at the same time, while they're learning how to think differently about their discipline and the way the faith touches it, it's important that they be part of what we're doing and feel like they're part of what we're doing, actually experience the good that we're doing. And so we find areas that they can grasp onto our mission, even while they're still being formed in terms of our Lutheran identity. So one example of that is vocation. So truth, freedom, and vocation. That's our three pillars of our education as we describe them. And so for those who have a little bit farther to go in terms of truth, we emphasize truth in how they're catechized, but we also give them opportunities to bring vocation to the forefront in their interactions with students and just in what the university is doing. So there are opportunities for them to truly contribute and to experience that contribution while they're being formed in the faith and how it interacts with their discipline.
So what is like on the forefront of higher ed at this time? Like what's most needed, obviously, besides money, and perhaps students? Is there anything else? I mean, as you're looking down the road and you're kind of feeling the squeeze of the demographic shift, as well as, funding and things like that, like what's the major concern that kind of institutions of higher ed need to be really focused on, or maybe I should put it this way: what are you guys immediately focused on?
I don't have skin in the game anymore the way that I did, so I'm going to let Russ take that. Not to toss the hot potato to you, Russ, but I could, if you want, after he's done, riff when it comes to just sort of my observations from the outside. But
yeah, like if you were king, what you would want.
Yeah. Or if I need to correct Russ, right?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. As you've done many times over the years.
Right.
Well, you had me at money, so I'm having trouble getting past that.
Most of us do.
Seriously, I believe what's needed within the church is something of I've heard it put this way: we need the church to be the church, and we need and that means that the people who make up the church need to be the church. And I think we've been lulled to sleep. I don't know whether we're still asleep, but over many decades of there being sort of a comfortable relationship, I believe too comfortable of a relationship between confessional Lutheranism and a socially conservative culture, that over those decades we became complacent and started onboarding too many of the culture's bad habits. I'll give a few brief examples. One is the culture of comfort. And by the way, my finger is pointing it as much at me as at anybody else. The culture of comfort. We live vastly more comfortable lives than earlier generations did. And we still seek greater and greater comfort, whether that's financial security or comfortable house and car or, whatever whatever that is, the culture of comfort has become deeply ingrained in us, so that we end up wanting to make sure that our kids, when they grow up, that they're happy and well off. Putting that above, well, I want my child to be faithful when he or she grows up. I want him or her to be a faithful spouse, faithful parent, etc. And so we need the church to be the church in that sense. The culture of comfort, culture of wealth, the culture of fitting in. We don't fit in, and maybe that's finally becoming clear that we don't fit in. And so, since we don't fit in, we shouldn't pretend or try to change ourselves so that we can fit in, or at least we fit in 6 days a week or something like that. We don't fit in, and we shouldn't try or pretend. We should always be caring and loving toward others, and we should find the common ground where we can. But ultimately, we are not like non-Christians, and to a great extent, we confessional Lutherans are not like other Christians, and that's obviously not completely true. But we should be fully Lutheran, and if we're creedal Christians, non-Lutherans but creedal Christians, we should be fully creedally Christian and live that life. So the savings, the financial savings of sending kids to the public school are not worth it in many cases, not in all cases, but in many cases, the financial benefit is not worth it. And so what I need as president of Concordia Chicago is for the long term, for the church to be the church, so that by the time a young person turns 17 or is about to turn 18 and is thinking about college, they're more reticent about going somewhere other than a confessionally sound, or at least creedally sound, institution for higher education. And that shift, more young people going to Lutheran schools or being homeschooled, or maybe going to a classical school even if it isn't Lutheran. And then by the time they are 17, 18 years old, a place like Concordia Chicago or a number of other creedally sound places is just, that's the default. And it would be an exception that would send them somewhere else. That kind of shift will bring great longevity to the institutions of the church, and will help make the church more faithful, because the congregants, the rank and file congregants, will be more fully formed in the faith because they went to a Concordia or to another creedally sound institution of higher learning.
Adam, do you have a follow-up to that?
Yeah, I'll sort of reflections, having spent 20 years in the Concordia University system at 4 of them. I'm one of those people I used to make fun of who would jump from.
I wasn't going to say
it. Hey, that's fine. I have no self esteem, so it doesn't matter. I think another thing would be, it's actually tangential to what Russ just said, is more buy-in. If we're talking Missouri Synod institutions, more buy-in. A lot of people are completely unaware of Concordias are completely independent financially from the Synod. So a lot of people are just sort of assume that the Concordia, I think a lot's accurate. They just assume the Concordias are funded by maybe some endowment that's floating around out there, or that the church, the Synod Inc., funds it or something like that. And when I would go out and do speaking gigs and whatnot on behalf of a Concordia, and dinner or whatever, people were often, and these are usually the hosts or the people who are funding the speaking event or whatever, they're shocked to learn about how the Concordias have, I don't know, it's been at least 30 years, I think, have received zero funding from Synod. So there's not, and this is not a criticism, it's just an observation. It doesn't seem that there's buy-in or there's skin in the game from the part of Synod in that way. Then people in congregations, they assume that the Concordias are just sort of fine. Then they learn, some controversy that may or may not be a reflection of reality at a Concordia, shocks them that something is going on at one of their, these Synod schools. But they don't understand what what the Concordias are up against, so they don't understand that it's really hard. I mean, I know a little bit from experience, but now I'm just assuming it's really hard to have even just a full confessionally Christian faculty, let alone a faculty that has solid confessionally Lutheran representation across the different departments. So, across Synod, that people would be made to be aware of what actually the Concordias are facing. That might give them a little more buy-in. And like Russ said, that I'm always amazed, or was always amazed, at when I'd go places and people were, my bio would be read or something, and I'd talk to people afterwards, and they're surprised to hear that the LCMS has all these colleges. And you're like, wait a minute. So, there's a whole lot of just real basic groundwork and sort of work for buy-in that ought to be done. I think too, and this is just me. It would be nice, and this connects to the finances, if the Concordias stood out not just in the church as like these what do they call them, the jewels in the church's crown or whatever, but they stood out culturally. The way that a Hillsdale or a Notre Dame kind of sort of does, that they had these reputations for being, solid academic institutions, but they have these people, they have a president or they have these professors who are kind of leading the way in their particular field. The way that, like you mentioned Carl Trueman's name earlier, the way that he, in many ways, while he's his own independent guy, he in a way represents Grove City College. Or Victor Davis Hanson, in a way represents Hillsdale College, and so on. And the Concordias they have a ton of talent. And maybe this is just a little bit of criticism. It's oftentimes not put to good use. Meaning, what I mean by that is, Russ and I know full well, more often than not, professors are, and this is not like some whiny complaint, but they are overworked in the sense that they have to take on overloads to an already heavy teaching load just to put food on the table. So we're back to money, I guess.
Yeah.
They should have invested in Bitcoin years ago, but
yeah. And this is to Adam's point. It really does financially. It does make a huge difference. I am sometimes asked why we don't publish something like Imprimis that Hillsdale publishes, or I'll be asked, in a number of different ways, why don't you do this thing that Hillsdale does? And the short answer is we don't have $1 billion endowment. And so
it's pretty close, though,
right? We'll just pass on that point. But seriously, the higher education has always been a philanthropic venture, and I do think you're right, Adam, that most people don't realize that we aren't funded by Synod, and so they just assume the money is there, and it is difficult. We're making a go, and we're making a good go of it, but we're not going to have $1 billion endowment tomorrow. And so, no, we're not close. But so anyway, that's why, Jason, when you said, besides money, and I joked that I was kind of stuck on the money, but it is true that
Yeah.
Money, that a number of the problems at the Concordias that have been experienced over the years, some of our no longer with us Concordias on the coasts, for instance, some of those problems were exacerbated because of a lack of funds, and therefore an overzealous pursuit of funds. Overzealous meaning trying to find funds without keeping the faith first and foremost. And that's just a fact of life. The money can corrupt us, but the lack of money, and therefore the lust for more money, sometimes it is a lust of necessity.
So here's my offer, and not that I have much to offer, because I realize, like, startup on doing something like Imprimis, or doing like those online courses that anyone can take, which is really a fundraising scheme for Hillsdale. For any of our seminaries or our Concordias, even though we've got great people in all those fields, to do that still takes time for the professors to put something together in a 6-week course, right? And then money to actually produce it. And I'm a low budget thing. If you guys or any of the Concordias out there have an idea of a podcast or a series of things that you would set aside time to talk to me about, I'd be happy to take them on, and at least take a look to see if I'd feel comfortable doing an interview like that. I got to know a little something about it, but that's my offer. If you, Russ, if you've got professors there that have something that they could offer to in their field that relates to theology or to the Christian life or things like that, I'd be happy to interview them and chat with them about it.
That'd be great. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks, guys, for your time and your thoughts. We'll be keeping you in our prayers, that you're able to continue the Lord's work in these institutions, so that they are there for, well, my children and hopefully grandchildren following after them, to train them as I was trained, having been a graduate of Concordia University, Chicago, actually River Forest at the time. But it's been it was a great joy of my life. I met my wife there, and I wouldn't be the same person had I not attended it. So you guys are in our prayers. Thank you.
Much appreciated. And I love hearing stories like that. I get to hear them all the time when I'm out talking with alumni. So many people's lives were changed here. And that makes it a great honor to be in the role that I'm in.
Yeah. So it's the end of the program, and I will put a link into Concordia University's Donate Now section in the show notes, so that maybe the people who are listening will throw you some shekels.
We'll take every shekel we can get. And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on about that. It just
No, not at all. I just want to make sure that we'll put this in there, and hopefully people will be generous. I'm not guaranteeing anything.
Nope.
All right, guys. Well, thanks for your time and your insight. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, good to talk to you with you.
Yeah, thanks for letting us be a part of it. Appreciate it.
All right, take care.